Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Lloyd, this is Em, and we're two former corporate lawyers from Hong Kong. We're currently traveling around the States visiting family, and we have a special guest today in our video, Milo.
Today we're answering some of the questions that you guys have had for us over the past few months. While we've gotten a lot of career-related questions, we're going to address those in a separate video because today we're just answering personal questions.
We've received a lot of similar questions from you guys, so we've grouped those together, and today we'll be answering them in more of an FAQ style video. So we'll start with by far the most asked question, which is what languages do we speak and what are our backgrounds? So in my case, I was born in Canada and I lived there until I was about 9.5 years old, after which I moved to Hong Kong, and I've been in Hong Kong pretty much ever since. I mostly spoke English growing up, but spoke Mandarin to my parents at home as well. In Hong Kong, I also went to international school, where we mostly spoke English and were encouraged to not speak Chinese too much. It was only when I got to university when I realized that having Chinese language skills would really help me finding a job that I really started to study both Cantonese and Mandarin. But English is definitely by far my most comfortable language, and at home we speak that with each other. Should mention as well that while we said we wouldn't talk about career stuff too much in this video, it is a bit easier to find a job in Hong Kong with Chinese language skills, but it's not impossible if you don't have them either.
As for me, I was actually born in California and I lived there my whole entire life up until I was 18 years old, after which I moved to Hong Kong to go to law school. Because my parents are originally from Hong Kong, my first language growing up was actually Cantonese, but after I started going to school in the US, I started to speak it less and less. Something I did really appreciate about moving to Hong Kong was that I started to speak Cantonese a lot more again. But because I didn't really learn to read and write Chinese growing up, it did make finding a job harder after law school, as Lloyd mentioned. So next, we also got a lot of questions asking how our family and friends and our bosses and colleagues reacted to us quitting and leaving the industry. So I think all around, the reaction that both of us got was very positive and supportive. If you've watched our videos on quitting, you'll know that we both thought about the decision for a really long time before actually pulling the trigger, and that we had very clear reasons for doing so. I think the amount of thought that we gave this decision and the fact that we clearly didn't make it on a whim did really help with how people received the news. I'm sure some of you in particular are wondering how Asian parents specifically would react to this kind of news. For me, my parents were actually quite receptive, and I think it helped in part that I'm actually not the first person in my family to leave the industry. I actually have a sister who graduated from law school but afterwards decided not to work as a lawyer or work in the legal industry period, so I think the idea of leaving the industry was already something that was not novel.
In my case, when I told my parents, I think they were more okay with the idea because we had put quite a bit of planning into it and had a bit of a financial runway. On top of that, I did let them know that it was possible for me to re-enter the legal industry at any time, and I think they were satisfied with that and wanted me to have the opportunity to explore and do something different. With respect to colleagues and my boss, as I mentioned to you guys before on the channel, I actually did and still do have a very good relationship with my boss, and I kind of had very transparent communication with him, so even pretty early on in my career, I let him know that I might potentially be interested in doing something different down the line. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't necessarily recommend that everyone goes and tells their supervisor or their boss that they're potentially thinking of leaving their job or quitting, because I have heard of some horror stories of people where they do disclose that kind of information and people at work stop investing in them or stop giving them interesting things to do because they sort of develop this mentality that you're just going to leave anyway. It really depends on the circumstances and whether or not you have that kind of relationship with the people that you're working with. But in my case, because I was that level of transparent, when I did eventually announce that I was planning on leaving the job, it did kind of help smooth things over, and it was something that was already kind of expected. It's also worth reiterating that even though I did plan on leaving my job at a pretty early stage, I still gave it my all when I was actually working, and I think that's an important thing too, where if I told people that I was thinking of leaving eventually and I kind of just didn't really put in the effort at work, probably wouldn't have gone down as well as it did. So that brings us to the next question, which is whether or not we've considered working in-house or staying in the legal industry, but just working in a different capacity outside of private practice. So I think this answer is a little bit different for both of us, but in my case, I actually quite enjoy legal work, so this is definitely something that I've considered. My gripes with the legal industry don't really have anything to do with the work, as that's something that I actually quite enjoyed doing. For me, it was more about the lifestyle and just basically the schedule that you kept as a service provider. With that said, after leaving private practice, I think the both of us have felt that we want to explore being self-employed and working on personal projects and not hopping right away into another job. But it's definitely crossed my mind that potentially one day, if I was looking for a job, that in-house might work or some other type of job in law but just not private practice might be more suitable. Someone also did ask whether or not I would consider doing litigation since transactional work seems to be more demanding. To be honest with you, I definitely always saw myself as more of a transactional lawyer, and I'm not super into the flow of litigation work, so I definitely feel like if I were to get back into law, it would be something in transactions.
As for me, as I mentioned before, I never really fundamentally found legal work interesting, so in-house is about as appealing to working in private practice for me. On top of that, what I specifically found interesting about legal work was working on active disputes, such as litigation and arbitration. However, what I observed after working with in-house lawyers for several years is that they typically only deal with the very early stages of a dispute. Once a dispute actually escalated to the point where it was going to court or going to arbitration, in-house lawyers would typically engage external counsel, i.e. lawyers in private practice, to deal with the matter. As a result, if I went in-house, I wouldn't even get to do the work that I actually found interesting, so in-house doesn't really hold any appeal to me. We've also gotten various questions relating to finances, such as how we plan for our current situation financially and what we're doing now for money. In terms of how we plan for this financially, a long time before the two of us even decided that we're going to quit, we got into the habit of tracking our expenses. Doing that not only gave us a good picture of where our money was going, but also gave us an idea of our baseline level expenses for living, such as rent, utilities, or groceries. Once we knew that, we used that to figure out how much we needed to save to give us a financial cushion for a set amount of time.
So by the time we both left the industry, we had about enough saved up that we could both go for about a year without needing any additional income. Now that is subject to a couple things as well. First off, what we've budgeted accounts for no income whatsoever, but we are of course expecting to see some income in the next year or so. And second, on top of basic expenses that we require to live, there are always extraneous circumstances or unforeseen things, so we do have a separate budget as well for those. All in all, it was really just about creating enough financial padding so that we felt comfortable leaving our jobs. But if we're being honest as well, it is definitely quite stressful and scary to not receive that monthly income, but it's something that we're happy to do to be able to pursue something different. It is also worth mentioning for context a couple of things. Both of us attended law school in Hong Kong as local students, and tuition is low compared to a lot of other places. Tuition for either of us was a little over $5,000 per year, and in my case, I had a full scholarship for the entire time I was at university. On top of this, income tax in Hong Kong is relatively low, so even though cost of living is quite high, as a dual income household, we were able to save up quite quickly. And that brings us to the next question, which is, what are we doing now? So the priority for us both as a joint project is definitely this YouTube channel. We're both enjoying content creation, and we've always wanted to work on something together as a couple. On top of this, as I mentioned in my video about why I quit my job, it does feel meaningful for us to be able to share things that are helpful to other people through our content.
For me in particular, as I've talked about before, doing something with a creative element is really important to me, and I definitely get that from creating content. I actually discovered this back in high school when I started dabbling in content creation for fun, and although there wasn't much of a creator economy back then, it did help me learn how much I liked creating content. Times have obviously changed now, and when I was thinking about what I might like to try after working as a lawyer, moving into content creation felt like quite a natural next step.
There are other things here and there too. When I was still working as a lawyer, I had a lot of clients that were operating in the crypto and blockchain space. So since leaving my job, I've been doing some things in that space as well, both in my personal capacity and as an advisor or consultant. And on top of that, the truth of the matter is, we don't really know what the year ahead of us has in store. While all the things that we're talking about are things that we're actively working on, we're also keeping our minds open to the endless possibilities of what we might discover that we're interested in doing and what we might decide is worthwhile for us to spend time on. So before we wrap this video up, we have some miscellaneous rapid fire questions that we'll also answer. So for the first rapid fire question, I get asked a lot about the model of keyboard that I use. So before I answer, I will caveat that, to be honest with you, I actually don't like that keyboard very much, and it's not very good. I bought it off Amazon when I was working in the UK, mostly because I wanted a wireless keyboard to use in the office. But to be honest, it didn't age very well, the keys got kind of gummy, and it looks nice, but it's not great to use. It's not a bad keyboard, but it's also not a great keyboard, so I don't really recommend it, but because you guys are asking, we'll throw it up on the screen and leave a link to it down below.
We've also gotten quite a number of questions about whether we plan to stay in Hong Kong or if we're thinking about moving elsewhere. To be honest, at the moment, we have no plans to leave Hong Kong. We both have a lot of family and friends there, and we do like living there, so no plans at the moment. We should answer the baby one.
Okay. So we also got a question about whether or not we're considering having a baby now that we've stepped away from our careers. I mean, that's definitely not in the cards for at least the next couple of years for either of us, but eventually at some point we probably want to have kids.
Next, we were asked what our routine is like now that we both quit our jobs as lawyers. I think in a lot of respects it's still the same because we've maintained a lot of the same habits that we talk about and show on this channel. However, I think the additional challenge that we now face is that we now no longer work for anyone and we're self-employed, so a lot of things are just down to self-regulation. There are new challenges now that we're both self-employed, but we're enjoying figuring that out as we go.
And the last question is what coffee and tea we drink and what helps us maintain our energy. Routine-wise, we usually start our day with our coffee 1 hour after we've woken up, and we usually follow it up with tea if we feel like more caffeine. Specifically, we buy locally roasted coffee, and in terms of tea, it's really just a mix of whatever we like. We have Japanese tea, Chinese tea, and English teas at home. In terms of what helps us maintain our energy, I would say the biggest thing is probably just the fact that we tend to try to get to bed on time and wake up at a reasonable hour as much as possible, even on weekends. And on top of that, generally just keeping good habits like we talk about on this channel really help us in maintaining our energy and our mood. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and thanks a lot for all the support on our videos. We've really been blown away with all the positive feedback we've been getting.
And we look forward to making more videos for you guys in the weeks to come.